Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to the GSMC television podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Mr. Finn. Now, this episode is going to be a little different. I know typically whenever I record and I kind of let you guys know more about the anime breakdowns, specifically about Boruto, I'm actually not going to do that today, just because I wanted to kind of change the atmosphere a little bit. Do something a little more retro. And one thing that I really just kind of wanted to talk about more was going to be more about my favorite comedy show, and that's going to be Friends. Now, for those that know about Friends, it was a show that came out on in 1994, I believe September 22nd. It was written by David Crane, Martha Kaufman, and directed by James Burrows. It had about I believe about 10 seasons. So I know a lot of people know about Friends, but the thing is that this show has literally just ignited, so much more of my comedy side. I've literally never really watched a show much like this that will eventually just kind of guide me into my own comedy realm. And I believe everyone kind of has their own idea when it comes to comedy. So with all that being said, based off the comedy that you like, that's going to be more about your portrayal of what kind of comedy route you'll end up kind of going towards. And I know it's kind of confusing, but it'll make more sense as I go more into this podcast. So, moving forward, I did want to go ahead and talk more about the show, about each character. This isn't going to be a weekly thing about Friends. I just wanted to kind of introduce myself more about that and my personal opinion about how great Friends is as a show in general. But yeah, so for those that just do not know anything about Friends, it's basically just about 6 20-something-year-old friends who live and work in New York. And these characters, they all go through certain situations in life where they all depend on each other. It's a very codependent relationship for sure, but it really just kind of keeps you on your edge, on the edge of your seat in terms of who's going to end up together, who's going to end up being more, vulnerable to certain situations, about certain relationships. My personal favorite character is Ross, just because, Ross is Ross. But every single character has its own individual uniqueness. And I absolutely just love the show. It's just such a retro phenomenon that has been around on our television for years. I believe it's been about 25 years, right? Yeah, around there. So yeah, it's been around, and it's just such a great introduction to what comedy really has become. Kind of going back to my discussion about what I meant by, if you like Friends, you like a certain type of comedy. Everyone has like a certain comedy taste. I totally get that. Friends is more about like sarcastic, dry humor. It's very like it's kind of punny. It's it's more like real life, real world humor where when things happen, you laugh because it just happened to that person. It's like, dang, poor person, poor guy. And then you kind of, go into other shows thinking about, say, for example, The Office. The Office is just really, really like situational, dry humor, awkwardness, kind of funny, where the main characters are kind of like, oh, well, hey, I'm gonna do this right here, and that's just gonna be funny to you and me because, bam, I gotcha, kind of thing, or really awkward faces, or really just weird situations that they put themselves in. It's very similar to Parks and Rec, which is also like a really great, phenomenal show. But that humor compared to Friends is just completely different. And the reason why is because if you notice, some people do not like Friends, but they love The Office, or they love Friends, but they hate The Office, because they're just two different dynamic types of shows, which I totally get. However, if you really think about it, they're really similar. They're just a different kind of slapstick. So you also have like other shows as well that are not like Friends or not like The Office, like a complete different realm of its own that is pretty popular. I would probably maybe say Seinfeld. Seinfeld has also been around, I believe, almost as old as Friends, maybe like a little longer. And it's more like sophisticated humor. It's still hilariously funny, and it's a really really great show. It's literally iconic. But I don't think I would ever see someone watching The Office and then watching Seinfeld. Granted, I could be wrong. People are probably out there like that. Totally fine. It's just kind of difficult to see that kind of same like genre mixed in with people that like Office or Friends or Parks and Rec. You also have like other shows like Community, or maybe even like New Girl, another personal favorite of mine. But if you think about it, Friends and New Girl, I would say it's like a good breed of between The Office and between Friends. They're both really, really good shows. They're both a little, or New Girl's kind of like dry humor, awkward, funny, but also like real life situations that are also funny to laugh at because you know what's happening to that character. They're both just kind of like a good mixture, which is probably why I personally like it. But definitely Friends is just more about like that slapstick kind of, oh, that happened to that person, haha, kind of funny. Where The Office is like, I'm gonna put my stapler uh, in Jello, and it's just kind of awkward or like really uncomfortable for like the other person, kind of putting the other person in suspense or getting them like super mad at each other just because that's just like the thing to do. Which I don't know. It's just really interesting to think about. I literally have just not met people that have a certain type of humor that are like literally like here's my list of my favorite comedy shows and they all tie in together. Like it's always like no I like this or that's not funny I like this. Like I would even go as drastic to say as like maybe even like South Park. I would not find anyone that likes South Park watching New Girl. You know, maybe they're like introduced to it, awesome, but they probably won't stick to it just because that's just not really like their cup of tea. Because South Park is just very like crude, uh, in your face humor, a little political, a little raunchy. New Girl is like cute and sassy, but also heartwarming, I guess. It's really interesting, honestly. I can't really like have like a really good opinion on both that will mediate one and another. But kind of going like back on topic, uh, I believe that Friends is honestly one of the beginnings of creating comedy that kind of like extended to the rest of those branches that also helped people understand what their humor is. Just because Friends is just such an old show, but it's still very relevant to this day. And you know, we even have like a lot of like famous actors that are still relevant in 2021, like Jennifer Aniston. I believe Matt LeBlanc is in Man with a Plan, and then Lisa Kudrow. She's like in movies here and there, but she's not necessarily super relevant. But she still makes some like special guest appearances. I know there was a TV show actually with Courtney Cox. I believe it was Cougar Town, and it was kind of like a Friends reunion where it had every single cast member from Friends end up showing their face on the show, and it was pretty great. You had Matthew Perry with Courtney Cox again, and then I believe Lisa Kudrow came back, Jennifer Aniston. Uh, I'm not sure if Matt LeBlanc or David Schwimmer appeared. I could be wrong, but it definitely did eventually tie in like most of the cast, which is just so great because as just like a Friends connoisseur, Friends fan, it's just so nice to see them back together. And if you do have the time, Friends is broadcasting on HBO Max if that is your thing. So it's no longer on Netflix, unfortunately. I believe it stopped airing about like a year ago on Netflix because I don't think Netflix could afford Friends again because it's just such a popular demand. But yeah, so that was definitely a thing. But yeah, so Friends. For those that know a lot about like the character development and just how far these characters went, you would know every like individual character personality, their traits, what they like, what they don't like, and who ended up with who. And we also had like a lot of like special guest characters that ended up even becoming super popular to this day that are super relevant right now, like Dylan and Cole Sprouse. They were on the Sweet Life of Zach and Cody. I believe they would like switch out on the show as Ross's kid, which is pretty funny because like they're twins. But yeah, we have them. I believe we also had Emma, which is also funny. Emma is actually a twin as well, and they both switch out together um, during the show, and it's just kind of cool to have like to see different sets of twins literally be starred on the show. It's pretty great, honestly. But I believe like the Emmas, I totally forgot their name, but they were actually in a most recent movie called Us, and that was a pretty interesting movie, right? Uh, for those of you that do not know what Us is, which you probably do, but if you don't, it's basically about kind of like a upside down world where you kind of like meet like your shadow, and your shadow is trying to get rid of you to be like the primary. So unfortunately, the twins they did become a victim in their own show, their own movie, but I won't go into that because spoilers. But yeah, so it's just kind of cool to see them being super relevant. But yeah, so Friends is definitely uh, a show to kind of go back on and really invest your time. If you feel like binging a show and laughing at the same time, Friends is definitely your boy. So definitely check that out. Uh, I'm gonna go ahead and um, just like let you know that throughout these next segments, I will basically be going more over about like the characters, the character developments, talking more about just like how they've changed, especially even like now. Like I feel like their characters are still like they're still Phoebe, they're still Ross, Chandler, even though they're like 50 something right now. But you literally see them as themselves still being relevant in different shows. Like they're like it's like Joey is still Joey in Man with a Plan. Like it's just funny to watch him. So yeah, I'll definitely go over that, and then make sure to stay at the very end of the break, and sorry, at the end of the show, and I will let you guys know who is my favorite who is my favorite Friends character, and who I feel like I identify with the most, and I'll kind of like let you know how you can kind of characterize yourself with the certain personalities of each character, kind of like a zodiac thing. So yeah. All right. Well, I'll see you guys after the break. Bye bye.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
All right, guys. Welcome back to the GSMC Network podcast, where we will go over uh, more about the trivia of Friends, character development, and just trying to dissect why Friends has just been such a cult classic and why it is still so iconic and still thriving to this day in 2021, where it's been basically about pretty long time. So yeah, with all that being said, let's kind of go more into it. The first thing I wanted to go into was just more about each character and just more about like who they are as a person on the show and as a person, like a person. So yeah. All right. So the first person that I wanted to go over was going to be my favorite, Ross Geller. All right. So Ross is, one of the main characters on Friends. The show ran from 1994 to 2004. He was portrayed by David Schwimmer, and he's just really known to be that nerdy personality. He's a little awkward. He has a really great sense of humor at being awkward, and just an overall good guy, honestly. I know a lot of people have their certain opinions about Ross because, Ross does a lot of shady things. People are kind of annoyed by him. However, in my opinion, I feel like they're all justifiable. I know I'll get like a lot of backlash for that, but hey, it's definitely a thing. All right, so kind of going more into about who is Ross. Uh, he is the son of Jack and Judy Geller, and he was raised on Long Island, New York. He is the older brother of Monica, who is also another main character on the Friends show. Ross was definitely not a ladies' man at all in any way back then. Uh, he was a little like he liked to like okay, so he would just kind of like experiment a little bit, dress up as a woman, and then sip some tea and ask people to dance with him, which is I totally get it. Like every kid had like their little moments, but it was really cute, honestly, seeing that episode, and I believe that it really just helped him become the overly sensitive guy that he is today. For those that know about Ross, Ross is super sensitive. He is definitely someone that you can joke around, but he'll probably take it seriously, and that's probably why it's funny. Uh, But overall, he's a good sport in the end. He is a good guy. And he ends up going to the same high school as Rachel and Monica. And eventually, he kind of like developed that crush on Rachel. But just, he kept it to himself. He didn't want anyone to know. Um, but of course, Rachel knew. Rachel Green is another main character on the Friends cast, who is basically his love interest, where they kind of end up getting more and more involved later on. They even had like a baby together, just super crazy. But yeah, so it was just kind of awkward at first because Rachel didn't really return those feelings towards him, which I totally get. But eventually, he kind of like proved his way in just because Ross was just not the kind of guy that uh, someone would go at or seek because he was just kind of like to himself. He didn't really try, and it wasn't until college when he met Chandler, who is another main character on the cast, and eventually became they're like best friends. They eventually became like a like super close like with one another, and it kind of all comes full circle later when they all meet again. But basically, Ross was just so devastated that Rachel did not like him, so he ended up creating a I Hate Rachel club with some like exchange students from Thailand who had no idea what the club was for. They were just kind of in it, but in spite of her, the two of them were just kind of like spreading rumors about her to everyone in the entire school, and just basically saying that Rachel was, she has both reproductive organs, and her parents just flipped a coin and decided to raise her as a girl, which was kind of messed up. But high schoolers do high schooler stuff, I guess. So it was so wide that Chandler heard about it in his all boys school, and that's kind of how they eventually really did form that bond. Yes, it was through college, but they were initially friends before, and she then spread a rumor regarding this all over the high school, and it just kind of like stuck around many years later. So there are some active people that are still hating on Rachel, which we actually see uh, Brad Pitt's. I believe he was like a guest star in the show. He really didn't like Rachel. Uh, and then eventually he got like super hot, and they ended up just kind of being like a weird place where he wanted to just spite her, but she was like all over him. A really funny episode as well. But yeah, so eventually, kind of like as things move forward, after he becomes best friends with Chandler, Chandler met Monica and Rachel in 1987 when Ross brought him home for Thanksgiving, and in 1988, uh, Ross met Carol, who is now Ross's ex, who is married to a woman, but they have a kid together. And over the years, before this, they got married and just like remained happy for a few years, with Ross drifting apart from Rachel, and with Carol falling in love with another woman. It was really like mentally traumatic and a shock for Ross, which only resulted in accumulating his divorce with her. But after that, after having like a kid, uh, it just really raised Ross's paranoia, insecurity, and fear in his burdened psyche. And yeah, like it kind of like formed Ross's mental state where he's always on edge. He's very insecure about himself in terms of like dating. Feels like he's just not good enough, or he's doing things that are gonna make her end up wanting to leave him. Which, poor guy, honestly. Ross is just such a great romantic guy, and he just kind of had like a lot of bad things happen to him. Honestly, I don't really blame him for being depressed after Carol decided to divorce him. But yeah, so it kind of goes more into the actual seasons with Ross being more romantically involved with Rachel. He had like some different like love interests here and there. I believe that there was this girl named Julie. They ended up dating for a little bit, and I believe that was when Rachel was trying to like ease her way in because she kind of started to see that Ross was a great guy and that he was just really like about her, madly in love with Rachel, and Rachel was kind of afraid to be more mature and put her insecurities and high school drama behind to actually just focus on him. And once she finally decided, like, hey, I actually like this dude, I think I'm gonna go for it. Julie comes in, swoops Ross, and the rest is history of that. But they do end up, obviously breaking up. But, Ross kind of just ends up becoming more not really involved with Rachel for like at least half the seasons. He does get like a little bitter towards Rachel because he was just like, well, why didn't you tell me that you loved me before I decided to go off and do my own thing? And that kind of put him at a standstill, put her at a standstill, and that's kind of like when the whole like we were on a break kind of cycle comes in. They just weren't like communicating, so they ended up just not being together at all until much, much later. But in the meantime, Ross gets a monkey named Marcel, who is super cute, by the way. The monkey was just kind of like like an icon itself. He would always play in the jungle. The lion sleeps tonight. He would slam some doors. Loves bananas. Poop in people's shoes. Like the works. Like it was pretty great. So that monkey is just so awesome. And eventually, Ross has to let him go because the monkey eventually reached sexual maturity and started humping everything. And afterwards, gets into an animal fighting ring, but then ends up getting him accepted into the San Diego Zoo, and eventually ends up being like in a movie. It's kind of like a really weird like turn of events, but yeah, that monkey has been going places. Um, so kind of going back to Ross. Ross eventually gets more involved with Rachel. I believe right before he gets married to Emily, kind of. Emily is this woman from England where they're just like super clicked. They are, in love with one another. They end up getting really, really invested in one another, which is great. But at the altar, Ross actually says Rachel's name literally at the altar. So Rachel hears it, everybody else hears it. Emily's devastated. They end up getting broken up, and that's kind of when like in the next season, Ross and Rachel decided to just get married in Vegas. And it was just kind of great because for me personally, I actually went to a Halloween party and I dressed up as Ross, and my significant other was dressed as Rachel, and it was pretty great. It's a really awesome, cute costume. Definitely have some pics for that later. But yeah, so they end up getting married, and Ross being a professor at NYU who has a PhD in paleontology, just kind of ends up realizing that they might have made a mistake and that they probably acted more about like their inner emotions, and they're kind of confused about it because they had no intention of getting together. And it kind of leads to them, having like off and on flings, eventually just kind of like, doing stuff whenever like they want to. All right, and yeah, so the thing is like uh, even after just so many like different hardships, Ross and Rachel eventually just ended up together. They had their kid. They had, Emma, who, like I said before, which basically they switched out between two twins, which is pretty great, right? And they just ended up, going back and forth. And Rachel decided to maybe even like just one day get back together at the very, very end of the season. You know, she tells him, that they're getting back together once again, at least just for that day. And if you guys do not know, there is a show called Joey, which is a spin-off where Joey Tribbiani basically even confirms that, he says, end quote, all my friends got married and had kids and moved on. So that just kind of like confirms that Rachel and Ross eventually just ended up together, and they just kind of lived on. So that's just a really, really nice ending for Ross, even though he went through so much hardships. But I personally believe that they were on a break. Speaking of breaks, all right, guys. So that was my second segment. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the third in the next couple seconds, but just make sure to stay tuned. And at the very, very end of everything, I will go ahead and kind of like let you guys know more about like which personality you will fit based off each character. Kind of like like the Zodiac style of Friends characters or character personality traits, and I'll also let you know my personal character trait as well. But yeah, all right, thanks guys, and I'll see you after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, guys, welcome back to the GSMC Network podcast, where we're going to go over each individual character and talk about their character developments, about what they went through in the Friends television series. So, our last segment, we talked about Ross. It was a little bit of a lot. I totally get it. But there's just so much to talk about him because I feel like he's just the most interesting character. In terms of other characters, though, I do want to go ahead and just talk about more about. We'll try to do two right now, and the next one's going to be about Monica Geller, and then we'll go into a little bit more about Rachel, just because we kind of did talk a little bit about her in the first segment, but I believe we kind of have time for this one as well. So yeah, so Monica Geller. She is, like I said, another one of the main characters in the Friends sitcom from 1994 to 2004, played by Courtney Cox. She was known as like the mother hen of the group, and she basically owned the apartment building where everybody hung out at. Right. So Monica is the younger sister of Ross. She was born on April 22nd, and the daughter of Jack and Judy Geller. So, like the rest of her family, which I did not mention before, but she is Jewish. They are a Jewish family. So, but she had a slightly difficult childhood than Ross. Uh, Basically, she was just kind of characterized by the bickering between her and her brother and her mother. She did not get along well with her parents, especially her mother, who unconsciously just kind of favored Ross over her on various occasions. And it just kind of like broke her a little bit to really feel like that mother's love. And it didn't really help in high school that she had a substantial amount of weights and peaked at, I believe, 255 pounds. And it's just kind of like sad because she kind of felt like because she was out of shape that she didn't really have like that motivation, or she didn't really have like that drive to feel herself. So because of that, she had fewer friends, but her best friend was Rachel Green. And for prom, she even had a date named this guy named Roy Gublick, who was her first kiss. However, by accident, um, actually ended up kissing her brother, which is a really weird situation to be in. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, it did. And yeah, she ended up meeting Chandler Bing at the Thanksgiving dinner in 1987, and she had a really big crush on him, and even became a chef because he told her that he liked her macaroni and cheese. Wow. Another really big like relationship that I love in this series is actually Monica and Chandler. I did not know that they like okay, so I knew that they met in the very beginning, but I didn't realize that she became the cook because of Chandler. So she basically just kind of like really had like a idea about him for a while, until she overheard him referring to her as Ross's fat sister, and that just kind of broke her a little bit. The shock was so great for her that she became determined to lose all of her extra weight, and by the next time that he would see her, um she would unintentionally try to like get back at him, um, and ended up even severing one of his toes during a failed attempt to get him naked and seduce him. But yeah, so this kind of just goes more into like Monica's character. She's like a little nutso, but she's pretty great. Uh, she ended up going to New York to become a chef, and she was roommates with Phoebe, who is another main character that we'll talk about in a second. But she's also across the hall from Chandler, who is friends with Joey. And later, Phoebe moved out because she was worried that their friendship would suffer due to Monica's obsessive tidiness. And she actually had a crush on Joey when he first moved in with Chandler. And that was a really unusual situation to be in too, because he basically stripped naked uh, in front of her, just expecting something. So Joey's a fun guy. um, but Monica overall, she's just like a really like kind and caring, friendly character. She is super notorious for being so obsessively clean. Just absolutely like basically you cannot do anything without being nagged at her, which I kind of get. Like my mom's kind of like that. She's just like, make sure you have that, or make sure that's like this, and it gets annoying after a while for sure. But I believe it all comes like from a good place. But Rachel kind of comes into the situation, and they end up becoming roommates. Aside from being like a neat freak, Monica can just also just be bossy and somewhat competitive. Um, and a little like sarcastic and snide, but who's not, right? So just kind of becoming like that neat freak, um, who Monica is. She is just a heartwarming character that just absolutely just gives so much to each individual character. She loves as much as she gives. Her way of affection is through cooking or just kind of, spending time with the person, which is really great. And that's kind of why Chandler, or sorry, not Chandler, who Rachel ends up becoming more involved with her. They end up being the best of best friends. And what's even funny is that even though the show is no longer airing, both characters in real life, they're actually best friends. Like they actually all hang out together, which is pretty awesome, right? So Jennifer Aniston hangs out with Courtney Cox. They're always doing stuff together. Like you always see like on their Instagram or maybe on their Facebook or whatever. They're always like just really involved in each other's lives. Same with Lisa Kudrow. Like they're always just together. So it's just really cool to kind of see that. And kind of going more into like Rachel Green as a character, Jennifer Aniston. Uh, she is she is basically the one of like the only characters that received a Emmy Award and a Golden Globe for her performance as Rachel Green. Uh, she is basically just kind of like a really welcoming character. She's a little, she's like a little loopy. Like she's, it's kind of hard to explain who Rachel is, but just kind of like the backstory a little bit. She is the daughter of Leonard and Sandra Green, who she also has two sisters, Jill and Amy, who are super spoiled. But so is Rachel. But she kind of ends up coming around, becoming more and more involved in other people's lives rather than just her own. And she ended up getting like a nose job because her nose was too big. Uh, she met Monica when they were both 6 years old, quickly becoming friends and just really just clicking even like into high school and and so on. uh she kind of knew like Ross, like I said before, like had like a crush on her, but she kind of kept it to herself and just kind of saw Monica as, or Ross as, Monica's geeky older brother, and eventually just kind of becoming like a bully herself, bullying people like overweight students. She was just very popular. She was that mean girl. And she kind of like dealt with the fact that she never seemed to notice um, her own feelings in a mature way, especially with that whole, the I Hate Rachel Green Club, uh, with the, you know, that whole rumor stuff going on. And it kind of like led more and more into her just being more involved with like the other characters. So basically, in the pilot of Friends, Rachel goes out with her friends celebrating being engaged. Um, then Rachel's just kind of like nervous about it. The person that she was marrying is this guy named Barry, and she tells them that she wants just more than a fling before she gets married. And um, Chandler kind of hears this and just kind of like tries to get her attention, but Rachel, ignores him because she's just not interested in Chandler. And Monica is like, "Oh my gosh, it's Rachel," and they kind of like reconnect a little bit and get more in touch with one another. And as the conversations kind of goes more and more, they end up getting lunch at another point, and you know at that point, Rachel is just kind of thinking about Chandler and not really thinking about Barry. And it kind of all comes for full circle later because in the very first episode, uh, you see Rachel in like a wedding dress, and she comes in and she's just kind of like done with the situation. She's just kind of like, all right, well, my marriage is officially over, and she just kind of like pushes herself into this friend group and meets like the whole gang. And that's when Ross is like, oh my gosh, it's Rachel. And they kind of end up, going from there, which is really great because her friends really, really pushed her to, not just be so dependent on her parents, uh, because Rachel literally like was on her daddy's credit card, did not want to get a job, and she eventually kind of made herself get cut financially. She became a waitress at Central Perk and ended up just being more self-efficient, which is really great for her. And ends it with Barry, and that's kind of like when the story starts. They kind of just end up getting more involved with like the gang's lives, and she kind of becomes like the Rachel Green that we know today. On and off with Ross, uh, having some flings here and there. She becomes like a buyer's assistant uh, for like a really big company. Forgot the name like on the top of my head, but um, yeah, she kind of goes like basically into fashion, and she gets more and more into fashion, and ends up becoming successful from it, which is really really awesome. Yeah, so Rachel just kind of becomes more involved with her finances, getting herself just together and not depending on her parents, specifically her dad and her sisters. Ends up having a kid, meets many different guys, and does their own thing for a little bit, but kind of comes full circle back to Ross. And like I said before, they have a kid together, and they end up together, like together. So it's just really nice to kind of see that character development from just being super dependent to just being her own person. So really great job with the character development on her personally, especially if she won like an Emmy and like a Golden Globe, like that's insane. So really awesome job, Jennifer Aniston. But yeah, so on the next segment, we already went over Ross, Rachel, and Monica. We'll go over the rest of the three and just kind of like, go more into them. And then if you guys stay over for the very, very end of the break or at the end of the segment, I will go over the character personalities and who you would fit as if you were to compare yourself to each individual character. Uh, so yeah, awesome. Well, thank you guys just so much for listening. I really, really appreciate it. I was hearing me blabber about my favorite show, but honestly, if you just kind of listen and like just watch it, you'll know exactly what I mean, and you'll quickly just absolutely love it, just like as much as I do. But all right, I'll see you guys after the break.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Network podcast, where we're going to go back and talk about the Friends character development. So far, we've talked about Ross, we've talked about Monica, we've talk about Rachel. And I wanted just to kind of go more into the last three. I know that it may seem like a little rushed, but honestly, it's not because these characters are literally just so well developed that there's not really any flaws, in my opinion. So they kind of just go straight into it, and it just kind of like makes a lot more sense that they are more well done than the rest of them. Like basically, they're just like super well done characters that there's just that yeah, there's not like a lot to it, but they're still pretty like great. So we have like kind of like your humor characters that are like they were like originally side characters, but they kind of eventually just became like the main part of the cast because originally Joey was technically supposed to be with Monica, and they're supposed to be like the main love interest, and then it was supposed to be Ross and Rachel, and Phoebe and Chandler were supposed to be the extras. However, it ended up just kind of becoming like the opposite a little bit more. But yeah, so kind of going straight into it, we have Phoebe Buffay, who is one of the main characters of the six. She is known for her bohemian lifestyle, her silly wit, and her guitar days of Smelly Cat. Uh, Basically, Phoebe, she kind of had like a really like hard life in terms of dealing with like her mother's, passing, uh, living out on the streets, homeless, at the age of 14, and just kind of like fending for herself, uh, you know, between like here and there, being like being behind dumpsters, beating up people, aka Ross, and she eventually just kind of like became like a jack of all trades in her own nature. She ended up just really becoming her own thing and such like a powerhouse that uh, she's just such a unique character, and she really invested herself with her guitar. Fortunately, she didn't really sing a lot after I think like season three, but she definitely did make a marking with her Smelly Cat her Smelly Cat uh, solo. But yeah, so she kind of ended up becoming really close friends with Rachel and Monica, originally being one of the roommates to Monica, and it she just has like her own like wacky antics that she ends up doing, and sometimes it feels like she feels like left out a little bit, just because she is like a little out there, but she's always just like that heart and soul of the group. She ends up mending people together, being like the voice of reason, and being a very big like comedic relief. But she does end up becoming super involved with her other characters' lives. She eventually meets her own like little uh, love triangle with, I believe, like Mike and um, Mike and the other guy. I keep forgetting his name, but you know what I mean. Like they just kind of like end up becoming like a thing. She ends up going with Mike, and she ends up like playing like her own sister Ursula, which is kind of funny. Basically, her twin, her evil twin, so to speak. And they ended up just kind of going back and forth with that little like shtick, but it was pretty great. She actually came up with that character Ursula because she was on another show where she actually was literally Ursula. Like she was her evil character in a different show, and she kind of brought that into Friends, which is pretty great. But yeah, she ends up just kind of marrying Mike. Originally, people wanted her to end up with Joey, but it just never happened. Um, but yeah, like there's not really much to say about Phoebe, like specifically. She's just kind of like her own entity and her own like powerhouse, like I said. But she's super like into nature. She can like read the auras of others. She can like remember some of her past lives. She could read tea leaves. Um, Apparently knows French. like she's just like she's a really like big like comedic relief, and she's just like really great thought out character for kind of like just being put in there out of the blue. But the next person I wanted to go over was actually going to be Chandler. And kind of going into the whole Chandler ordeal, uh, Chandler is also one of those characters where he doesn't really end up becoming relevant on purpose. They basically kind of just like shot him in there and ended up just being one of like the main ones because I believe originally he auditioned and he was just supposed to be like that side, and then they're like, "Wow, this is actually really great. Let's kind of like keep him more into the show," and they end up doing it, and he ends up being added, right? So it's just really cool to kind of see that. It's like the same idea with like Phoebe, but yeah. So Chandler is one of the main characters. He's portrayed by Matthew Perry. He's just noticeable for his sarcastic and witty sense of humor. And um, throughout most of the series, no one really knows what Chandler's job is, but yeah, he honestly he does something. uh, but he ends up getting more involved with Ross and Monica. Like I said before in the other segments, where he originally was like that side character, became more relevant with like the Thanksgiving episode, motivated Monica to become more invested into cooking. Originally had a crush, got heartbroken because Chandler thought ill of her, and they eventually kind of became full circle and became friends again. But Chandler was Joey Tribbiani's, you know, personal best friend. I feel like they kind of like completed like the group of friends. Chandler lived with Joey until season 6, and then he moved in with Monica, who they've been dating for about like a year, and they lived like across from Monica. They became, uh, well, like sorry, Chandler became one of the most wealthiest friends because he was always just kind of saving money from his job for the last 6 years. Uh, he's kind of like that slapstick comedy that everybody really loves. Um, Not really like meaning to be funny, but is funny because he does funny things by accident. So it's funny. Like honestly, Chandler is such a meme. He's such a vibe, um, and really becomes like the life of the party. Uh, Although Chandler didn't really have like the best like early childhood. Um, his mom is a erotic novelist, and his dad is a cross-dressing burlesque star named Helena Handbasket, and at an all-male burlesque show. So, due to this, he just kind of resorted to like the um, denial, the sarcasm, the you know, the lack of awareness of his own mental state, and just kind of like subduing it into comedy. Um, and his friends kind of like helped him out of that a little bit. Like he is the most sarcastic person with a heightened fear of commitment. Um, he just kind of ends up becoming his own thing. He ends up becoming more involved with Monica, and Chandler is just he's so brash, zany. He never lets up because he's always using his sarcasm as a defense, and has a tendency to become off as needy and makes first bad impressions with like the constant joke making and brash demeanor. But despite this, he's a really good friend. He stands up for his friends when they're messing up, but he knows that they mean well. He's always looking after them, and he's just kind of always like the perfect guy that you just want to be like close friends with. So, which is kind of why him and Joey's relationship just becomes so strong, such like a great like ideal friendship where they're always going to be looking after like one another, and it kind of evolves more into a relationship with Monica, where they end up becoming a thing, and they end up adopting, uh, I think, two kids, and get like their own house, and like invite Joey to stay with them. So that kind of goes into the next thing. I wanted to kind of go over Joey. Joey is going to be single-handedly just the most funniest character on the show, in my opinion. He even had like his own spin-off. That's how funny he was. But he's like an Italian kind of guy, the family of 8 children, being like the only male. He was just kind of like he's kind of that guy that you would go to, that if you just like wanted like a quick laugh or a continuous laugh, you would hang out with him, or you needed someone to like to cheer you up or like to be lighthearted with. Joey is that guy. Um, and like in the pilot, originally Joey and Monica were supposed to be together, but it just didn't happen. That's why there is that one episode when Monica had a crush on Joey. It was supposed to eventually turn into a thing, but it didn't. Which honestly, I can't really see it any other way. Chandler and Monica all the way for sure. But yeah, so Joey's personality, um, he's just kind of like he's he's very like good natured. He's charming. He's a great he's a great guy. Super awesome. He's not really bright, but he loves food. Uh, the whole shebang with like he just absolutely loves talking to girls. Um, very like New Yorker esque. Um, loves his pizza and his sandwiches, but he kind of has like some trouble with like in the working department in the beginning. With his acting, he doesn't really get anywhere with his acting until later in the series, where he finally guest stars in All My Children, and like the show with like him like in the hospital. Like he just becomes like a brain surgeon, and it's a whole thing. Honestly, I feel like Joey's relationship with the characters are more with of him as being like a supporting actor. He does eventually become like the heart of the whole group. More of like just helping every individual person out and not really thinking about himself, and um, like just absolutely proves it. When someone is not thinking straight, he ends up snapping them back to where they need to be. So Joey is just kind of like seen as that showcase of um, mockingly sarcastic sense of humor, with plenty of like good one-liners, and then throwing in like the occasional one or two later. But Joey's just so much more than that. He just really ends up becoming really involved in these people's lives and really makes like a really big impact. Uh, and fun fact, Joey is the one that ends up kissing everybody on the show. He's kissed Rachel, Monica, Phoebe, and Chandler and Ross. So pretty interesting, right? But yeah, so honestly, all these characters, they're just so great. They really like highlight each other's personality, especially with the cast. And one thing that I want to just kind of like let you guys know is, despite all of this, even after the show has been done with for a very long time, they're still all the best of buds. They still all hang out. They're still, connected. So that's just really, really cool to see how the show has brought someone's like lives together, even after such like a long time. But yeah, so this is basically the end of my segment, the end of the show. I wanted just to kind of like let you guys know more about these certain like character um, personalities. So if you think about it, let's kind of start off more about like let's start with Ross, right? So Ross if you feel like you are very, very sensitive, very open-minded, but also very like careful about like what you say because you're afraid of like maybe like hurting someone's feelings, or maybe you're just trying to like overall do everything at once for like for other people, you may be a Ross. Ross, he's countlessly done like so many like romantic things, but he does it in a way where it benefits him and the other person. He's not like a selfish character at all in any way. He is seen as selfish a lot by other people, but I personally don't feel like that. I feel like he really does care about the people that he's with, and he cares about himself too. So it really just comes full circle with him. If you feel like you're just very lighthearted, you love a good laugh, you love to consistently be like that shining beacon for other people, you're definitely a Joey. Joey's definitely the light. He continuously shines on his friends, and such a great guy. If you feel like you are wanting to help out people, you're wanting to kind of like push them off their feet and send them their way, or maybe just like take them in and listen to them, you're definitely going to be a Monica. And it's kind of similar to Rachel, but Rachel is more of, she's like a little selfish, a little needy and pampering, but a really great friend. Like once you kind of like break that surface and you are like in that line of like the group, you're there forever with her, which is really awesome. And last but not least, if you are feeling like you're trying to hide your darkness with sense of humor, you're definitely a Chandler. But yeah, and then Phoebe's great too. Phoebe's just more of like that creative side of a person, always very expressive and willing to help out anyone in need, but at the same time, will not flinch at punching somebody. Yeah, you do not want to run into Phoebe alone in a dark alley, but still a great friend. If I were to classify them as like certain zodiacs, I would probably say Joey's definitely a Pisces, Ross is a Scorpio, Rachel is a Taurus, Monica is a Capricorn, Chandler is a Sagittarius, and Phoebe is an Aquarius. If that helps kind of like perspective wise, that's kind of like what I mean. But yeah, again, thank you guys so much for listening. I know that was like a lot, but I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that you guys have a great weekend. Stay safe out there and have a great Easter. And yeah, have a good one. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.